Throughout my Humanities 2 course, I have found myself enjoying to read and write about the different styles of music in each section the most. I believe that the beginning of the Renaissance to the end of globalism have had major changes within music. I love to learn about the similarities and differences between all of the chapters I got to experience. Even in today's society, music continues to change and be created in diverse ways. Each chapter gave several examples and memorable individuals as to what music was the custom at that specific time in its era. Here is a little recap of everything that caught my eye in the music world. The Renaissance was the first chapter we covered and one of my favorites, especially with the musical style. Renaissance music was perceived as a time when secular music overtook religious music. The printing press encouraged the protection and distribution of all kinds of musical composition. Music was an essential ingredient at intimate gatherings, court celebrations, and public festivals. Even though most of the music was to be sung, the 16th century made considerable advances in the development of instrumental music that became popular. While reading about the Reformation, I became more knowledgeable that Northern music was an important part of the 15th and 16th century. Ever since the Reformation obviously dominated the religious and social history, it also gratified all forms of artistic endeavor, including music. For example, Luther himself was a student of music that stimulated the writing of hymnals and restructured the German Mass to include both the congregational and professional singing to emphasize music as a religious teaching. Our next chapter to read about was the encounter. It stated that African music shared the forceful rhythms of poetry and dance. It consisted of a single line of melody without harmony. With most African dialects, variations of musical effect originated from tonal variation and quality. African culture is replicated in the use of responsorial chants involving call and answer patterns comparable to their poetry. The Baroque was another favorite chapter of mine. The center of European musical activity in the 16th century was the city of Venice. For example, Giovanni Gabrieli was a principal organist and was one of the most influential composers of his time. In this period, he brought in a new and dramatic style of polychoral and instrumental religious music. Gabrieli was among the first to stipulate an instrument for each part in the musical alignment, earning him the name the father of orchestration. The Enlightenment was the era that was extremely rich in musical landmarks. Music was filled all throughout the courts and concert halls. Although religious music was still very much an obligation, it was dominated by massive amounts of music composed for profane entertainment. Also, there were certain unique features joined to set Western musical culture apart from the rest of the world. For example, harmony is proper and vital to music that musical structure should be the original product of solo composer, and that pieces should be learned and performed in much the same routine each time they are played. These traits that strain order and formality over naturalness and creativeness would come to characterize classical music. In the chapter over Romanticism, the most idealistic of all the arts is music. It was the most abstract and vague of the arts and was capable of freeing the mind and speaking directly to the heart. The 19th century shaped an enormous quantity of music in all genres, a phenomenon that is reflected in the fact that audiences today listen to more 19th century music than in music from any other era. Its symbol is personalized expression, a feature as apparent in large orchestral works as it is in small, intimate pieces. For example, Beethoven was the leading composer of the early 19th century and one of the most greatest musicians of all times. Throughout his time, he had many great achievements. His bold use of dissonance and his unexpected pauses and silences reveal the rule-breaking spirit of the Romantic artist. Materialism was the industrial era in the urban scene where the late 19th century music came in. Puccini's French contemporary, Claude Debussy, did his job in stimulating music in a very diverse direction. He admired the Romantic composers for the way they had unrestricted the formal simplicity of classical composition. Debussy experimented with 5-tone scale from East Asia and with non-traditional harmonies. In addition, he found his greatest encouragement in contemporary symbolist poetry and in impressionist painting. Debussy achieved several of his goals during his time and created many new things along the way that other people looked greatly upon. No less than the visual arts, the music of the early 20th century signifies an assault on tradition and modernism. Modern composers banned conventional modes of expression, including outdated harmonies and composition. Melody, also, became a minor standing to formal contemplation of arrangement. Up-to-date musicians explored groundbreaking effects based on dissonance, the free use of meter, and the unorthodox combination of harmonious instruments. The outcomes were astonishing to the ear as modern art was to the eye. To illustrate, Arnold Schönberg's compositions were perceived in the Romantic tradition and began to progress a musical language interpreted by dissonant, unfamiliar chords. He treated all 12 notes of the chromatic scale correspondingly to create the first atonal compositions as an alternative of forming tones around a home key. Globalism was sadly our last chapter and my all-time favorite and one to read and write over. My parents grew me up on rock music, although it has definitely changed throughout time. The origins of rock lie in the popular culture of the mid-1950s. The words rocking and rolling, initially used to define sexual activity, came to identify an uninhibited musical style that drew on a wide-ranging mixture of popular American and African American music, including country, swing, gospel, rhythms, and blues. During this time, there were many people who were responsible for the birth of rock, such as Bill Haley, Little Richard, and Elvis Presley. These musicians characterized this music by a high dynamic level of sound, fast and hard rhythms, a strong beat, and an earthy and informal lyrics. Rock music became an expression of a youth culture. For instance, the rock sound associated with dancing, illegal drugs, sexual liberty, and rebellion against restrictive parental and cultural customs also reflected the new consumerism of the post-war era. As I gave this presentation, I hope you have a better understanding as to why I loved reading and writing and just overall learning about the different types of music in each era. I also hope you get to see the many similarities and differences between these specific chapters. To this day, I still delight in music and the types of styles that are being brought into this period we are in now. It will be interesting to look back on this and see how much more music has changed within the years. I hope everyone enjoyed this class as much as I did.